My name is Marissa, and I just turned 32 last month. Living in Boston has been an adventure, but nothing prepared me for what happened at my father's 65th birthday party. When Dad stood up and announced, "Three of my children made me proud, one made me question the DNA," my world imploded. Everyone laughed while I sat there feeling my entire identity crumbling. The worst part, my mother joined in the laughter. I had spent months preparing the perfect gift, but in that moment, I knew what I had to do. If you're watching this, where are you from? Hit that like button and subscribe as I share how I canceled my father's birthday gift right in front of everyone and how the tables unexpectedly turned days later. The Morgan family home sits on a quiet street in suburban Boston, a two-story colonial with navy blue shutters and a wraparound porch where we spent countless summer evenings. Growing up, that house felt like the perfect backdrop for what I thought was the perfect family. My father, James, a successful civil engineer, had built his reputation designing bridges across New England. My mother, Eleanor, taught fourth grade at the local elementary school, beloved by students for her creative teaching methods and homemade cookies on special occasions. In our family hierarchy, my older brother, Thomas, now 38, always stood as the golden child. With his perfect grades and athletic prowess, he followed our father's footsteps into engineering and now runs his own consulting firm. My sister Sophia, 35, became a pediatrician, combining our mother's love for children with our father's analytical mind. My younger brother Daniel, 29, works as a research scientist in a pharmaceutical company, already holding 2 patents before hitting 30. Then there was me, perpetually feeling like the square peg in a round hole. While the rest of my family excelled in math and science, I gravitated toward art, literature, and creative expression. In a household that celebrated academic achievements with enthusiastic dinners, my A in English or art award garnered polite acknowledgement but never the same excitement as a science fair victory. Your sister is presenting her research at a conference in Chicago next month, my father would announce at dinner, beaming with pride. When I shared news about my promotion at the digital marketing agency where I worked, he would nod and say, "That's nice, sweetie," before turning the conversation back to Thomas's latest engineering project. Even physically, I stood apart. While my siblings inherited our father's tall frame and our mother's warm brown hair, I was 5 inches shorter with fiery red curls that refused to be tamed. Throughout my childhood, strangers would often comment on how different I looked from the rest of my family. "She must take after your side," they would say to my mother, who would smile tightly and change the subject. I remember staring at family photos, scrutinizing our features, wondering why I alone had inherited these characteristics that seemed absent from both sides of our family tree. Back then, these thoughts were fleeting questions, rather than the thunderous doubts they would later become. Despite the differences, I treasured the special moments I shared with my father during childhood. He taught me to fish when I was 7, taking me to a quiet lake while my brothers were at baseball practice. I remember the patience in his voice as he showed me how to cast, the pride in his eyes when I caught my first sunfish. "You've got a natural feel for it, Marissa," he had said, his hand warm on my shoulder. "Sometimes you just know exactly when to pull." When I turned 16, Dad spent weekends teaching me to drive, showing remarkable patience as I struggled with parallel parking. Those drives around empty parking lots, his calm voice guiding me through maneuvers, remain some of my fondest memories. But something shifted as I entered adulthood. When I chose to major in arts communication instead of pursuing science or engineering, a subtle distance grew between us. His questions about my studies became less frequent, his interest in my career path noticeably cooler than his enthusiastic discussions about my siblings' professional achievements. "Marketing is fine, Marissa," he said when I landed my first job after college, "but it's not solving real-world problems like medicine or engineering." Those words stung, planting seeds of doubt about my value in our family. Still, I continued seeking his approval, working harder, achieving more, hoping each accomplishment might finally be enough. For his 65th birthday, I wanted to create something truly special, something that would remind him of our connection. I spent 3 months crafting a handmade memory album, chronicling our relationship from those fishing trips to recent family gatherings. The album featured handwritten stories, carefully restored photographs, and artistic touches that showcased the creative skills he had never fully appreciated. Alongside the album, I had booked an exclusive 5-day fishing trip to Maine just for the two of us at a luxury lodge known for its exceptional salmon runs. It cost nearly 2 months of my salary, but I believed it would be worth every penny to reconnect with my father and perhaps finally earn the recognition I had been seeking for decades. "I think Dad will really love your gift," Sophia said during our planning call, her voice unusually hesitant. "It's very thoughtful." "You don't think it's too much?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. No, she assured me quickly. "It's perfect. Just perfect." In the weeks leading up to the party, I selected a new dress, practiced what I would say when presenting the gift, and imagined his face lighting up with surprise and appreciation. I pictured him pulling me into a warm hug, finally seeing me for who I was, rather than who he wished I would be. The night before the party, I called my mother to confirm final details. "Everything is set for tomorrow," she said, her voice strained in a way I didn't recognize at the time. "Your father is looking forward to seeing everyone." "Is everything okay, Mom?" I asked. "Of course, sweetie," she replied too quickly. "Just tired from all the planning. See you tomorrow." I ended the call feeling uneasy but pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on wrapping my gift and preparing for what I believed would be a turning point in my relationship with my father. The waterfront grill overlooked Boston Harbor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the water. My father had always loved watching the boats, and the restaurant, with its nautical theme and seafood specialties, seemed the perfect venue for his milestone birthday. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the private dining room, where approximately 30 guests gathered, including extended family, colleagues, and lifelong friends. I arrived early to help my mother with final arrangements, placing name cards and adjusting floral centerpieces. The room looked beautiful, elegant, without being ostentatious, much like my father himself. "This turned out wonderfully, Mom," I said, straightening a tablecloth. She nodded distractedly, her eyes continually darting to the entrance. "Your father should be here any minute. Thomas is bringing him." As guests arrived, the room filled with cheerful conversation and laughter. My brother Daniel approached, champagne flute in hand. "Nice job with the decorations," he said, glancing around approvingly. "Dad's going to love this." "Thanks," I replied, noticing the gift bag he carried. "What did you get him?" Daniel grinned. "A limited edition fishing rod signed by his favorite angler. Found it through a client who collects sports memorabilia." My stomach tightened slightly. The gift sounded perfect, thoughtful, in exactly the way my father would appreciate. "That's great," I managed. "He'll love that." Sophia arrived next with her husband and 2 children, carrying a large package wrapped in silver paper. "Custom golf clubs," she whispered when I asked about her gift. We all chipped in, Thomas, Daniel, and me. The knot in my stomach grew tighter. While my gift was personal and meaningful to me, I suddenly worried it might pale in comparison to these grand gestures. Still, I reminded myself the fishing trip would surely impress him. When my father entered, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" though the party wasn't actually a surprise. It was merely tradition, a family joke that had continued through birthdays over decades. Dad beamed, looking distinguished in his navy blazer and khaki pants, his silver hair neatly combed. The evening progressed pleasantly through cocktails and appetizers. We ate dinner, a 4-course meal, featuring my father's favorite seafood dishes. Thomas gave a toast, highlighting our father's professional achievements and dedication to family. Sophia shared funny anecdotes from our childhood that had everyone laughing. As dessert arrived, a towering chocolate cake decorated with fishing motifs, my father stood to address the gathering. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward the man of the hour. He looked emotional, a rare display for a man who typically kept his feelings closely guarded. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," he began, voice slightly rough. 65 years. It's quite a journey." He spoke about his career, his marriage, his friendships, each segment met with warm applause. Then he turned to the topic of his children. Being a father has been the greatest privilege of my life, he said, and I felt my heart warm. Watching my children grow into the people they've become has brought me immeasurable joy. He gestured toward Thomas, my oldest following in my professional footsteps but blazing his own impressive trail. To Sophia, my daughter healing children and bringing such compassion to everything she does. To Daniel, my youngest son whose brilliant mind continually amazes me with its innovations. The room had grown quiet, everyone waiting for him to mention me. I sat straighter, a hopeful smile on my face. You know, my father continued, a strange smile playing at his lips. I've often said that 3 of my kids made me incredibly proud. He paused dramatically, and I felt that smile begin to freeze on my face. And one, he added, made me question the DNA. Laughter erupted around the room, loud, immediate, uncomfortable laughter. I sat motionless, the words hitting me like physical blows. Through the sudden ringing in my ears, I could hear people chuckling, could see my mother's shoulders shaking with mirth, could feel the curious glances darting my way. My face burned. My throat closed. Something inside me cracked open, spilling years of doubt and insecurity across this perfect evening. I looked around the table at my siblings. Thomas looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Sophia studied her plate intently. Only Daniel met my eyes, his expression apologetic but helpless. I glanced at my father again, searching his face for some sign that this had been a poor joke, that he regretted the words immediately. Instead, he was accepting a glass of whiskey from a family friend, still smiling, entirely untroubled by what he had just said. Without conscious thought, I found myself standing, chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The room began to quiet as I walked deliberately to where my gift sat among others on a side table. I picked up the carefully wrapped package and the envelope containing the fishing trip details. Walking to my father, I felt strangely calm, as if watching myself from a distance. The room had fallen completely silent now, all eyes on me. You know, Dad. I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. I spent months making this for you. 3 months designing an album of our memories together. And this envelope, it's a 5-day fishing trip for just the 2 of us. Cost me 2 months' salary. I held them up for everyone to see before slowly, deliberately tearing the envelope in half, then quarters. I dropped the pieces onto his empty dessert plate. Then I opened the album to the middle and ripped it straight down the binding, the sound deafening in the silent room. But I guess some gifts, like some daughters, just don't measure up to expectations. My father's face had drained of color. Marissa, it was just a joke. Everyone knows I was joking. Do they? I asked quietly, because it sounded an awful lot like something you've been wanting to say for a long time. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the exit, ignoring my mother calling my name, pushing past Daniel who had stood to intercept me. Marissa, wait, Sophia called. He didn't mean it like that. But I was already out the door, tears finally breaking free as I rushed toward the parking lot, leaving behind the laughter that had shattered something fundamental inside me. The 15-mile drive from the restaurant to my apartment passed in a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white, tears streaming unchecked down my face. The car radio played softly in the background, the cheerful tune a jarring counterpoint to my emotional collapse. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse on the passenger seat. I ignored it, knowing it would be family members trying to smooth over what had happened. At a red light, I glanced at the screen. 5 missed calls from Sophia, 3 from Daniel, 2 from my mother, and a text from Thomas that simply read, "He's an idiot sometimes. Call me." When I finally reached my apartment building, I sat in the car for several minutes trying to compose myself. The enormity of what had happened, of what I had done, began to settle over me. I had publicly confronted my father and destroyed my gift in front of everyone he knew. There would be no going back from this, no pretending it hadn't happened. The phone rang again. Sophia. Reluctantly, I answered. "Are you okay?" Her voice was tight with concern. "No," I replied honestly. "I'm really not. What Dad said was completely inappropriate. We all know that." Do you? I asked, because everyone seemed to find it pretty hilarious. Sophia sighed heavily. People laughed because they were uncomfortable. It was a terrible joke. Was it a joke, though? Because it felt like something he's thought for a long time. Marissa, you know he loves you. Do I? The question hung between us, heavy and unanswerable. Just come back, she pleaded. We can talk this through. There's nothing to talk about, I said flatly. I think he made his feelings pretty clear. I ended the call and finally made my way upstairs to my apartment. Once inside, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted, yet paradoxically wide awake. My mind raced, replaying not just the events of the evening, but countless moments throughout my life, examining them through this new painful lens. The fishing trips that had seemed special suddenly felt like obligations. The driving lessons that had felt like bonding now seemed like mere parental duty. Every instance when my achievements were acknowledged less enthusiastically than my siblings now appeared as evidence of a deeper truth. I had never truly belonged. I pulled out old photo albums, studying pictures from my childhood with an almost forensic intensity. How had I never noticed how different I looked, the shape of my face, my build? Even the way I stood in family photos seemed suddenly alien compared to my parents and siblings. Around 3 in the morning, I found my birth certificate tucked away in a folder of important documents. James Morgan was listed clearly as my father. Eleanor Morgan as my mother. The certificate looked official, legitimate. But now for the first time I questioned its truth. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake watching shadows cross my ceiling, remembering the countless times throughout my life when someone had commented on how different I looked from my siblings. The way family friends would sometimes give me curious glances. The awkward silence that occasionally fell when relatives discussed family resemblances. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. I called my office and requested a week of personal leave citing a family emergency. My boss, hearing the raw edge in my voice, approved it without question. Throughout that day, the calls and messages continued. I read some, ignored others. My mother left 3 voicemails, each more pleading than the last. Daniel sent supportive texts offering to come over. Thomas called twice but didn't leave messages. Then late that afternoon, a text from my father arrived. Your dramatic exit ruined what should have been a special evening. When you're ready to act like an adult, we can talk. I stared at the message in disbelief, anger rising like bile in my throat. No apology. No acknowledgement of how his words had hurt me. Just criticism for my reaction. That text solidified something in me. Whatever fragile hope I'd held that this had all been a misunderstanding evaporated. With shaking hands, I blocked his number, then curled up on my bed and finally allowed myself to sob uncontrollably. The next morning, I called my mother, determined to get answers. We need to talk, I said when she answered, my voice raspy from crying. Oh, Marissa, yes. Please come over. Your father is at work and we can speak privately. No, I said firmly. Not at the house. Meet me at Riverside Cafe at noon. She hesitated before agreeing. While waiting for our meeting, I dug deeper into family records, searching for clues I might have missed. I found my hospital bracelet from birth school records, listing my parents' names, childhood medical forms. Everything matched the official narrative of my life. But my father's cruel joke had planted a seed of doubt that was rapidly growing into certainty. I decided to order a DNA testing kit online. If there were questions about my genetic heritage, I wanted concrete answers rather than painful speculation. The kit would arrive in 2 days. 2 days until I could take the first step toward whatever truth awaited me. As the week progressed, the emotional toll began affecting my daily functioning. I barely ate, losing myself in research about genetic inheritance, family secrets, and the psychological impact of discovering one's parentage isn't what was believed. I avoided friends' calls, unable to explain what was happening when I myself didn't fully understand. At work, colleagues noticed my absence and sent concerned messages. I responded with vague reassurances, unwilling to share the humiliation and confusion I was experiencing. The thought of explaining that my father had publicly joked about questioning my DNA, that my entire family identity might be built on lies, was too overwhelming to contemplate. Each night brought vivid nightmares. In one, I stood before a mirror that refused to show my reflection. In another, I sat at a family dinner table that slowly elongated until I could no longer reach or hear anyone else. I woke from these dreams drenched in sweat, feeling more isolated than ever. By the 5th day after the birthday party disaster, I found myself researching jobs in other cities, fantasizing about starting fresh somewhere no one knew me or my family. Chicago, Seattle, Denver. Places far enough away that holiday visits would be difficult to manage. A clean break seemed increasingly appealing as the weight of uncertainty pressed down on me. 1 week after the birthday party incident, my closest friend Sarah called for the 3rd time in 2 days. This time I answered. "I'm coming over," she announced without preamble. "I've got wine chocolate and absolutely no patience for whatever excuse you're about to give me for ghosting everyone." 30 minutes later, Sarah was sitting on my couch, taking in my unwashed hair and the chaos of my apartment with a concerned expression. "Okay, spill it," she said, pouring 2 glasses of red wine. "What happened? And don't say nothing, because you look like you haven't slept in days." The whole story came pouring out, my voice breaking, as I described my father's comment and the laughter that followed. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly outraged. "That's completely messed up," she said when I finished. "But Marissa, before you completely unravel your life, let's think about this objectively. Your dad made an incredibly hurtful, inappropriate joke. It was cruel, and you had every right to be upset. But is it possible you're jumping to conclusions about what it meant? You didn't hear how he said it, Sarah, or see everyone's faces. They all knew something I didn't." Sarah considered this. Maybe, or maybe they were just reacting to an awkward situation. People laugh at uncomfortable things all the time. She leaned forward, taking my hand. "Look, I've known your family for 15 years. Your dad has always been kind of emotionally constipated. He makes bad jokes when he's trying to express feelings. This wasn't that," I insisted. "This was different." Sarah didn't argue, but suggested I get more information before making any drastic decisions. "You've ordered the DNA test, which is good. That will give you concrete answers. But maybe there are other ways to get information too." "Like what?" "Like talking to people who've known your family a long time. People who might know things your parents haven't told you." The suggestion gave me something constructive to focus on. Together we made a list of family, friends, and relatives who might have insights into my family's past. Sarah's practical approach helped clear some of the emotional fog that had enveloped me for days. 2 days later, I was sitting at a local coffee shop working on my laptop when a familiar voice called my name. I looked up to see Patty Williams, my mother's friend of over 30 years, approaching with a surprised smile. "Marissa, what a lovely coincidence. I hardly ever come to this cafe." Patty had been a constant presence throughout my childhood, a kindergarten teacher who had taught at the same school as my mother until her retirement 5 years ago. She had attended every significant event in our family's life, including my father's recent birthday party. "Hi, Patty," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Would you like to join me?" She settled in, ordering a chai tea when the barista came by. "I've been meaning to call you," she said, her expression growing serious. "After what happened at your father's party." I tensed immediately. "It's fine," I said automatically. "It most certainly is not fine," Patty replied firmly. "What your father said was completely inappropriate, and I told him so the next day." My surprise must have shown on my face because she continued, "Eleanor and I have been friends since college, Marissa. That gives me certain privileges, including telling James Morgan when he's being an absolute fool." Something about her straightforward condemnation loosened the knot in my chest slightly. "Did he say anything when you confronted him?" Patty sighed. "He said it was just a joke, that everyone was taking it too seriously. But I know better." She hesitated, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Your parents went through a very difficult period before you were born. Few people know about it now. My heart began racing. What kind of difficult period? It's not really my place to say. She hedged, then seemed to reconsider. But given the circumstances, they separated for almost a year when Thomas was 5 and Sophia was 2. It was a dark time for both of them. They separated? I repeated, stunned. This was entirely new information. Patty nodded. They eventually reconciled, and you came along about 2 years later. I always thought your arrival helped heal whatever had broken between them. This revelation shifted everything. A separation before my birth opened up possibilities I hadn't considered. Patty, do you know if my mother was involved with someone else during that separation? She looked uncomfortable. As I said, it's not my place. But if you're looking for answers, you might want to talk to your Aunt Louise. She and your mother were particularly close during that period. Aunt Louise wasn't actually my aunt, but my mother's cousin who lived about 2 hours away in New Hampshire. We saw her rarely, usually just at major family events. Thank you, I said sincerely. This helps more than you know. After Patty left, I sat in the cafe for another hour processing this new information. A separation explained so much, potentially including why my father might have doubts about my parentage. But it also raised painful new questions about my mother's honesty and the true nature of my family. The next morning I drove to New Hampshire without calling ahead. Aunt Louise's small farmhouse looked exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits, the garden meticulously maintained despite her 70 years. She answered the door on the third knock, her surprise evident. Marissa, goodness, what brings you all the way out here unannounced? I need to talk to you, Aunt Louise, about my parents, about the time before I was born. Her face changed, a flash of understanding crossing her features before she composed herself. You'd better come in. I'll put the kettle on. Louise's kitchen was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from ceiling beams. She busied herself making tea, her back to me as she spoke. I suppose this has to do with what happened at your father's birthday party. Eleanor called me quite upset. Did she tell you what he said? Louise nodded, placing a steaming mug before me. She did. Completely inappropriate, of course. But James has always had a cruel streak when he feels threatened. Threatened by what? Louise settled across from me, her wise eyes studying my face. By the truth, perhaps, or by the possibility of it coming out after all these years. My hands trembled slightly around the mug. And what is the truth, Aunt Louise? She sighed heavily. Your mother should be the one telling you this. Please, I said quietly. I need to know. After a long moment, Louise nodded. Your parents separated for nearly a year when you were just an idea, not even a possibility yet. James had an affair with a colleague. Eleanor was devastated. This was the opposite of what I had expected. My father had the affair, not my mother. Yes, with a woman from his engineering firm. It nearly destroyed their marriage. Eleanor moved in with me for several months. But they got back together. Eventually, it took time and counseling. But during their separation, Eleanor found comfort elsewhere too. Louise paused, measuring her words carefully. There was a man, Richard Donnelly, an art teacher at her school. Kind, creative, utterly different from James. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure Louise could hear it. An art teacher. She nodded. They were together for several months. When Eleanor and James decided to reconcile, she ended things with Richard. It was about 8 weeks later that she discovered she was pregnant. With you. And my father? Did he know about Richard? He knew Eleanor had been seeing someone. I don't think he knew details. When they reconciled, they both agreed to put the past behind them. When she got pregnant, James assumed the child was his. Eleanor never corrected that assumption. But he must have had doubts, I pressed. Otherwise, why make that joke? Louise's expression grew troubled. James noticed differences as you grew. Your artistic nature so unlike the rest of the family. Your appearance. I think he suspected but chose to ignore those suspicions until recently. What changed recently? I can't say for certain, but about 6 months ago, Eleanor mentioned that Richard had moved back to the area after decades away. He's teaching art at a community college in Boston now. Richard Donnelly, an art teacher, living in Boston. The missing piece of my identity puzzle potentially within reach. Do you know how I can find him? Louise hesitated, then went to a drawer and withdrew a small address book. Eleanor gave me his contact information when she heard he was back. In case of emergency, she said, though I never understood what emergency would require his involvement. She copied an address and phone number onto a slip of paper. Be gentle with yourself, Marissa, and with your parents. The truth is rarely simple. I left Louise's house with more questions than answers, but also with something I hadn't had before: a direction, a path toward understanding who I really was. That evening, back in my apartment, I received an email notification. The DNA test results were available. With trembling fingers, I logged into the website and opened the report. The ethnicity breakdown showed 48% British Isles heritage and 23% Eastern European, consistent with my mother's known background. But instead of the German ancestry that should have come from my father's side, I saw 27% Scandinavian markers that matched neither of my parents' known backgrounds. More tellingly, the DNA matches section showed no close paternal relatives from the Morgan family tree, despite several distant cousins on my mother's side appearing as matches. The scientific evidence confirmed what my heart had already accepted: James Morgan was not my biological father. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, the reality settling over me. Then I made a decision. It was time to confront my parents with what I had learned. No more secrets. No more pretending. Whatever the fallout, I needed the complete truth. The following day, I drove to my childhood home, the DNA test results, and Louise's information about Richard Donnelly tucked into my purse. The familiar driveway, the oak tree my father had hung a swing from when I was 6. The garden my mother tended each spring all appeared exactly the same, though everything had changed. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage before finally approaching the front door. Rather than using my key, I rang the doorbell like a visitor. My mother answered, her face showing a complex mix of relief and apprehension. Marissa, thank goodness. We've been so worried. Is Dad home? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Yes, he's in his study. Please come in. I stepped into the foyer, struck by how simultaneously familiar and foreign it felt. Family photos lined the hallway, documenting decades of shared history. I paused at one showing all 6 of us at Thomas's wedding 5 years earlier, studying our faces with new awareness. James, my mother called toward the back of the house. Marissa is here. My father appeared in the hallway, his expression guarded. He looked older somehow, as if the past 2 weeks had aged him visibly. Well, he said stiffly, you finally decided to talk to us. James, my mother warned quietly. I took a deep breath. Yes, I think we need to talk. All of us. We moved to the living room, settling into an uncomfortable triangle. I remained standing while they sat on the sofa, wanting the slight advantage of height for what was to come. Without preamble, I withdrew the DNA test results and placed them on the coffee table. I had a DNA test done, I said simply. My father's face paled. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. According to this, I continued, James isn't my biological father. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, my father spoke, his voice rough. It was a joke, Marissa. A stupid, thoughtless joke. I never actually had a DNA test done. But you've had suspicions, I pressed. For years, haven't you? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Occasional questions. Nothing serious. Serious enough to humiliate me in front of 30 people on your birthday. My mother interrupted, reaching for my hand, which I pulled away. Marissa, please, it's complicated. Yes, it is, I agreed. Aunt Louise told me about the separation, about Richard Donnelly. At the mention of that name, my mother collapsed back against the sofa as if physically struck. My father's expression hardened into something unrecognizable. Louise had no right, he said coldly. I had every right to know who my father is. I shot back, emotion finally breaking through my carefully controlled facade. Every right to know why I've always felt like an outsider in my own family, why my achievements were never quite good enough, why my interests were never quite important enough. That's not fair, my father protested. I've always loved you. Have you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent 32 years resenting me for something that wasn't my fault. My mother began to cry softly. Please let me explain. Yes, I said, sitting down at last. Explain. Through tears, she told the story of the separation, confirming what Louise had shared. James's affair with a colleague, her devastation, finding comfort with Richard, an art teacher who valued her and made her feel worthwhile again. When James and I decided to try again, I ended things with Richard. I truly wanted our marriage to work. She glanced at my father, whose face remained impassive. When I discovered I was pregnant, I thought, I hoped the baby was James's. The timing made it possible. But as you grew, as your personality and talents emerged, you knew, I finished for her. She nodded miserably. I suspected. But by then James was so attached to you. We never discussed it explicitly. It seemed kinder to let sleeping dogs lie. I turned to my father. And you? When did you know? He was silent for a long moment. I don't think there was ever one moment of knowing. Just a growing awareness that couldn't be ignored. Your artistic talent, your temperament, your hair. And you resented me for it. I said, the pain of this realization sharp and fresh. No, he said quickly, then paused. Yes, sometimes. Not you exactly. The situation. What your mother had done. I was a constant reminder of her infidelity. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, I tried, Marissa. I tried to love you the same as the others. But you couldn't, I whispered. And last week, after decades of pretending, you finally said what you've always thought. In front of everyone who matters to you. My father's shoulders slumped. I had too much to drink. The words just came out. I've regretted them every minute since. Regretted saying them out loud, you mean? Not thinking them. He had no answer for that. I turned back to my mother. Does Richard know about me? She shook her head. I never told him I was pregnant. He moved to California shortly after we broke up. He only returned to Boston recently for a teaching position. I want to meet him, I said firmly. My father stood abruptly. This is absurd. One tasteless joke, and you're ready to throw away 32 years of family. I'm not throwing away anything, I replied evenly. I'm trying to understand who I am, who I've always been. James, my mother said quietly. She has a right to know. His face flushed with anger. After everything I've done, all the years I've... He broke off, pressing a hand to his chest, his breathing suddenly labored. James, my mother rose in alarm. What is it? Nothing, he gasped. Just indigestion. But his face had gone, gray sweat beading on his forehead. He took a step forward, then staggered. My medical training from countless family conversations kicked in. Mom, call 911, now. As she rushed to the phone, I guided my father back to the sofa. Lie down, I instructed. Try to stay calm. Marissa, he breathed, clutching my hand with surprising strength. I'm sorry. Then his eyes rolled back and he lost consciousness. The next hours passed in a blur. The ambulance arrival, the rush to the hospital, the waiting room filling with family as word spread. Thomas arrived first, then Sophia with her husband, finally Daniel, straight from his laboratory. What happened? Thomas demanded, his face tight with worry. We were talking, I said vaguely. He got upset, and then just collapsed. Talking about what? Sophia asked, her medical training making her tone sharp. I couldn't bring myself to explain, not here, not now. Family stuff. Is there any news? Daniel intervened before Sophia could press further. The doctor said he's stabilized. Mild heart attack. They're running tests. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by guilt. Had our confrontation caused this? Was the truth worth my father's health? Thomas pulled me aside while Sophia spoke with the doctors. Look, I don't know what happened between you two, but this isn't the time for whatever it is. Dad needs us to be united right now. I nodded numbly. Of course. He's been a mess since that disaster at his birthday. Thomas continued. You haven't exactly been easy to reach. I needed time, I said defensively. Well, time's up, he replied shortly. Whatever he said, whatever he did, he's still our father. The words landed like a blow. Our father. A truth I now knew was only partially applicable to me. As Thomas walked away, Sophia approached her expression grave. They're letting family in to see him 2 at a time. Mom's in there now. You should go next. Me. Wouldn't you or Thomas? Go, she said firmly, taking my arm. I need to talk to you anyway. She guided me down the hallway toward my father's room, but before we reached it, she pulled me into a small waiting area. What's really going on, Marissa? And don't tell me nothing. Dad doesn't have heart attacks over nothing. I hesitated, then decided Sophia deserved the truth. I found out James isn't my biological father. Her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise crossed her face. You knew? I realized, stunned. You already knew. She sighed, dropping into a chair. I suspected. Mom never confirmed it, but I found some old letters when I was 17. Letters from someone named Richard to Mom during their separation. It wasn't hard to do the math. Why didn't you ever say anything? What would have been the point? It wouldn't change that we're sisters, that we're family. It might have helped me understand why Dad always treated me differently. Sophia's expression softened. He loves you, Marissa, in his own flawed way. When you were born, he was the one who wouldn't put you down, who walked the floors with you when you had colic, who taught you to ride a bike and drive a car. Those are things any father would do, I argued. Exactly, she said meaningfully. Any father, which is what he chose to be despite knowing you might not be his biological child. I hadn't considered this perspective, that what I had interpreted as dutiful parenting might actually represent a conscious choice, a decision to love a child who might not be his own. The DNA test confirmed it, I said quietly. He's definitely not my biological father. Sophia took my hand. DNA doesn't make a family, Marissa. Love does. Shared history does. Dad made a terrible joke, yes. He hurt you deeply, and that's not okay. But one cruel moment doesn't erase 32 years of being your father. Before I could respond, a nurse appeared. Your mother is asking for you, Ms. Morgan. I followed her to my father's room. Sophia's words echoing in my mind. Inside, my father lay connected to various monitors, looking suddenly small and vulnerable in the hospital bed. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand, her face etched with worry. Marissa, she said with evident relief. Come in. My father's eyes opened as I approached. I'm sorry, he said immediately, his voice weak. For everything. I stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. The doctor says you're going to be fine. Just need to rest. Not about this, he clarified. About what I said. At the party. About everything. My mother squeezed his hand. We can talk about this later when you're stronger. No, he insisted. Now, while I have the courage. He looked directly at me. I was afraid, Marissa. Afraid of losing you if you ever found out the truth. So I pushed you away first. Kept a distance. It was cowardly and unfair. Tears welled in my eyes. Why say that thing at your party in front of everyone? He closed his eyes briefly. Because Richard moved back to Boston. I saw him at a faculty event last month. He looks just like you. Same red hair. Same way of gesturing when he talks. I panicked, thinking everyone would see it too. That ridiculous joke was my way of controlling the narrative, I suppose. Taking power over a truth I've feared for decades. His honesty disarmed me. This wasn't the stern, emotionally distant father I knew. This was a man confronting his deepest insecurities, his greatest fears. I want to meet him, I said gently. I need to know that part of myself. My father nodded slowly. I understand. And I won't stand in your way. He reached for my hand. But please know, this biology aside, you have always been my daughter. I may have failed at showing it properly, but I have always loved you. In that moment, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward it. A recognition that healing might be possible even after such profound hurt. As I left the hospital that evening, I decided I would seek out Richard Donnelly. Not to replace the father who had raised me, but to understand the missing pieces of my identity that had always felt just out of reach. 2 weeks after my father's heart attack, I found myself standing outside a small art studio near Fenway Park. The building housed classrooms for Boston Community College's Fine Arts program. According to the schedule posted outside, Richard Donnelly was teaching an advanced painting class that would be ending in 15 minutes. I waited nervously, second-guessing my decision to come unannounced. Perhaps I should have called first, prepared him somehow. But how does one prepare a stranger for the news that they may have a daughter they never knew existed? Students began filing out of the studio, chatting animatedly about techniques and upcoming projects. Finally, a tall man with silver-streaked red hair appeared, locking the door behind him. Even from a distance, the resemblance was undeniable. We had the same coloring, the same slight build, even similar ways of standing. My heart pounded as I approached. Professor Donnelly. He turned friendly curiosity in his expression. Yes. Can I help you? My name is Marissa Morgan. I'm Eleanor Morgan's daughter. His face registered shock, then dawning comprehension as he looked more closely at my features. Eleanor's, he repeated softly. How old are you? 32. He did the mental calculation, his expression shifting through surprise, confusion, and finally understanding. I see, he said simply. Perhaps we should talk somewhere private. We walked to a nearby cafe, neither speaking until we had settled at a corner table with cups of coffee. I had no idea, he said finally. Eleanor never told me she was pregnant. She didn't know for certain when you broke up, I explained. And then you moved to California? Yes. I took a position at Berkeley, stayed there until last year. He studied my face openly now. You look so much like my mother. The hair, the eyes. I've always wondered where they came from, I admitted. No one else in my family and the Morgan family has these features. And James? He knows. He's suspected for years, I think. It came to a head recently. I explained about the birthday party, the DNA test, my father's heart attack, and the conversations that followed. Richard listened intently, his expression compassionate. I'm sorry you found out this way, he said when I finished. It must have been incredibly painful. It was. It is. But it also explains so much about my life. Why I never quite fit. Why my interests in art and design were tolerated rather than celebrated. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I've spent my life in the arts. My father was a sculptor, my mother a textile artist. He smiled slightly. Creativity runs deep in our bloodline. I always felt like there was something missing, I confessed. Some explanation for who I am that I couldn't access. And now I'm trying to piece it all together. To reconcile the family I grew up with and this new information about where I come from, who I come from. He hesitated before asking, Would you like to know more about my family, my background? Yes, I said without hesitation. Very much. We spent the next 2 hours talking. Richard shared stories about his Scandinavian grandparents who had immigrated to Minnesota, explaining the genetic markers that had appeared in my DNA test. He showed me photos on his phone of his parents, his sister, his 2 children from a marriage that had ended 15 years earlier. You have half-siblings, he said, showing me pictures of a son and daughter in their 20s. David is an architect in Portland. Emma teaches elementary school in Chicago. They're good people. I think they'd like to meet you if you're open to that someday. The idea of siblings who might share my temperament and interests was both exhilarating and overwhelming. A whole branch of family I had never known existed. I'd like that, I said, though I think I need time to adjust to everything first. Of course, he agreed. This is a lot to process, for both of us. As our conversation wound down, Richard asked, "What happens now with James, I mean?" I sighed. "I'm not sure. He's recovering well physically. Emotionally, we're in uncharted territory. He says he wants to repair our relationship. And do you want to repair it?" "I think so," I said slowly. "Despite everything, he's been my father in all the ways that matter most. He made mistakes, serious ones, but so did my mother. So have I." Richard nodded. "Family is complicated. Biology is just one small part of it. Would you be open to meeting him someday? And my mother?" He considered this. "If it would help you, yes. Though I imagine that would be difficult for everyone." "Probably," I agreed, "but maybe necessary for healing." As we parted, Richard gave me his phone number and email address. "Take whatever time you need," he said. "I've waited 32 years without knowing you existed. I can be patient now." Driving home from that first meeting, I felt a curious lightness. Not because all was resolved, far from it, but because pieces of my identity that had always felt misaligned were finally shifting into place. That evening I called my father and told him about meeting Richard. To my surprise, he listened without anger or defensiveness. "He seems like a good man," I said cautiously. "I'm glad," my father replied, his voice steady. "You deserve that." It was a small moment, but it felt like the first tentative step toward a new kind of relationship, one built on truth rather than unspoken resentments. 1 month after my father's heart attack, our family gathered for dinner at my parents' home. It was the first time all 6 of us had been together since the birthday party disaster. The atmosphere was tense but not hostile as we settled around the dining table where we had shared thousands of meals over the decades. My mother had prepared all my favorites: roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, spring vegetables, and apple pie for dessert. The effort wasn't lost on me, a peace offering expressed through food, as was her custom. Conversation remained careful through the first course, focusing on neutral topics. Daniel's research, Thomas's children, Sophia's latest medical conference. I shared updates about a new marketing campaign I was developing, and for the first time I could remember my father asked thoughtful questions about my creative process. As dinner progressed, the artificial politeness gradually gave way to more authentic interaction. Thomas told a funny story about his son's first soccer game that had everyone laughing. Daniel and I fell into a familiar pattern of gentle teasing. By the time dessert arrived, some of the old family dynamic had reasserted itself, though transformed by our new shared awareness. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room, I lingered behind to help my father with coffee. He had lost weight since his heart attack and moved more carefully, but his color had returned, and his doctor was pleased with his recovery. "I have something for you," I said, retrieving a wrapped package from my bag. He looked surprised. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a new album similar to the one I had destroyed at his birthday party, but different in significant ways. This version included not just photos of the 2 of us, but also pages acknowledging the complex truth of our relationship. There were empty spaces labeled "To be continued" and "New memories." "Instead of a fishing trip, I thought maybe we could fill these pages together," I said quietly. "If you want to." My father's hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages. "I don't deserve this, Marissa." "It's not about deserving," I replied. "It's about choosing to move forward, together." He looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I would like that very much." We rejoined the others in the living room where Sophia had been showing photographs from her recent family vacation. My mother watched me closely as I sat down, noting the album in my father's hands. She smiled tentatively. "I met Richard again yesterday," I said, deciding transparency was the only way forward. "He'd like to meet you both someday when you're ready." The room grew quiet. Thomas and Daniel exchanged glances, still adjusting to this new reality. "I think I would like that too," my mother said softly. "Eventually." My father nodded slowly. "Yes, when the time is right." We talked late into the evening, more openly than ever before. Old stories were revisited with new understanding. Painful truths were acknowledged without accusation. It wasn't perfect reconciliation that would take much longer, but it was an honest beginning. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. "Your album," he said. "It's the most meaningful gift I've ever received. Thank you." "We have a lot of empty pages to fill," I reminded him. "We'll fill them," he promised. One memory at a time. The following weekend, I met Richard again, this time at an art museum, where one of his paintings was featured in a faculty exhibition. We walked through the galleries together, discovering shared aesthetic preferences and similar ways of responding to visual stimuli. "Your instincts are remarkably similar to mine," he noted as we discussed a particular installation. "Nature or nurture, I wonder?" "Both, probably," I replied. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately. How we're shaped by genetics and environment, by biology and experience." "And what have you concluded?" "That I'm fortunate to have been influenced by both James Morgan and Richard Donnelly, even if I didn't know about the latter until recently," Richard smiled. "A gracious perspective." "Not always," I admitted. "I have my moments of anger still. Days when I resent the secrets, the lost opportunities." "That's natural. Healing isn't linear." Over coffee afterward, I showed him photos of my marketing campaigns, the creative work I was most proud of. He recognized elements of artistic composition and color theory that I had intuited rather than been formally taught. "You have a natural eye," he said. "With training, you could do remarkable things." "I've always wanted to take proper art classes," I confessed, "but it never seemed practical." "Perhaps now is the time," he suggested. "I happen to know a decent teacher." The offer to study with him was tempting, a chance to develop a part of myself that had always existed but never been fully nurtured. "I'd like that," I said. "Very much." As the weeks passed, my relationship with Richard developed organically. We met regularly, getting to know each other without pressure or expectation. Sometimes we painted together in his studio. Other times we simply talked, filling in the decades of shared history we had missed. Simultaneously, my relationship with my father, because James Morgan would always be my father, regardless of biology, began to heal in unexpected ways. Freed from the burden of secrecy, he seemed able to connect with me more authentically than ever before. We started a tradition of Sunday morning walks, where we discussed everything from current events to family memories to my growing interest in fine art. My mother, too, seemed changed, more open and demonstrative in her affection. She apologized repeatedly for the secrets she had kept, each time more deeply than before. "I thought I was protecting everyone," she explained during a private lunch. "You, James, even Richard. But secrets have a way of causing more damage than the truth ever could." "We can't change the past, Mom," I told her. "But we can choose how we move forward." By the time summer arrived, Richard had met my parents in a carefully arranged dinner that proved less awkward than anticipated. There were difficult moments, certainly, but also surprising instances of connection. My father and Richard discovered shared interests in jazz and sailing. My mother and Richard reminisced about mutual friends from decades earlier. The fundamental respect each man showed for the other's place in my life laid groundwork for an unusual but functional extended family dynamic. Perhaps most meaningful was the day Richard met his half-siblings, my half-siblings, for the first time. David flew in from Portland, Emma from Chicago. We gathered at Richard's apartment, 3 adult children meeting a father or sister they had never known existed. The resemblance between us was striking, not just physically but in mannerisms and expressions. "I always wanted a sister," Emma said, hugging me tightly, "especially one who gets my weird artistic side." "I always felt like the odd one out in my family," I confessed. "Too creative, too emotional." "Welcome to the Donnelly clan," David laughed, "where everyone's too creative and too emotional." That afternoon, surrounded by newfound family who shared my temperament and interests in ways the Morgans never had, I felt a profound sense of belonging I had sought my entire life. Yet later that week, when Thomas's son won a science competition, and my father called to share the news, I felt equally connected to the Morgan family that had shaped me, supported me, and loved me, however imperfectly, for 32 years. I began to understand that identity isn't singular or fixed. We are composites of biology and experience of genetic inheritance and lived relationships. The truth of my parentage hadn't diminished my connection to the family who raised me. It had simply expanded my understanding of myself and added new dimensions to my sense of belonging. One evening that fall, I sat with my father on his back porch, watching the sunset through autumn leaves. We had been working together on the album, adding photographs and mementos from recent months. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what makes someone a father." "What's your conclusion?" I asked. "That it's not about DNA. It's about showing up. About choosing to love someone every day through difficulties and differences. About seeing them for who they truly are and loving them anyway." He turned to face me. "I failed at that sometimes, Marissa. Let my own insecurities cloud how I saw you. I'm sorry for that." "I know," I said simply. "I forgive you." And I meant it. Not because what had happened wasn't painful, not because the years of subtle rejection hadn't left scars, but because holding on to anger would only perpetuate the hurt. Forgiveness was a choice just as love was a choice, just as family was ultimately a choice we made and remade every day. That night, driving home under a canopy of stars, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for months. My life had been upended, my understanding of myself fundamentally altered. Yet somehow, through the painful process of truth and reconciliation, I had arrived at a place of greater wholeness than before. I am Marissa Morgan Donnelly, now embracing both sides of my heritage. Daughter of Eleanor and James, and in a different but equally valid way, daughter of Richard. Sister to Thomas, Sophia, and Daniel, as well as to David and Emma. Part of two families that are slowly, carefully becoming one extended network of connection. My story isn't about DNA or biology. It's about how truth, however painful, ultimately heals. About how family transcends genetics. About how love, when chosen consciously, rather than assumed, automatically grows stronger and more resilient. If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, if you've questioned your place in your family or in the world, know that identity is more complex and beautiful than simple categories suggest. We are all composites of countless influences, some known and others hidden. The journey to self-understanding may be difficult, but the authenticity waiting on the other side makes every painful step worthwhile. Thank you for sharing in my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please leave a comment below about a time when you discovered something unexpected about yourself or your family. How did it change you? And remember to like, subscribe, and share if you found value in this journey we've taken together. No matter what surprises life has in store, remember that you have the power to write your own ending at one choice, one day, one relationship at a time.